With her son in her arms and shame in her eyes, she was left to her own devices. But an Apache found her and saw beauty where everyone else only saw a burden. That night, she and her baby slept in the arms of a love the world deemed impossible. Subscribe to the channel and listen to this beautiful story. The sun was bidding farewell to the sky like an open wound, spilling orange blood over the rocks of the Sonoran desert. Margaret knelt on the hot sand, her knees raw from 3 days of aimless wandering. Her red dress, once beautiful, now clung to her sweaty, tired body. She clutched a blue bundle that stirred occasionally against her chest. Her son, the only thing left of the man who had promised to take her to a new life. Tears streamed down her round face, leaving clean trails in the accumulated dust. She tried to remember his words, the promises whispered in her ear during cold winter nights. "We'll have land in California," he'd said. "We'll be free," he'd lied. "You'll be my wife." A bigger lie still. Margaret had always known she was different from other girls. Since childhood, on the farm in Kansas, she'd heard the whispers. She's too fat, her mouth is too big, she laughs too loud. Her mother would pinch her when she spoke at the table. Her father would look away when she entered the room. Her brothers would make jokes about who would be brave enough to marry her. At 18, when Thomas arrived in town with his wagon and his blue eyes full of dreams, she thought God had finally heard her prayers. He didn't laugh at her appearance. He didn't look away. He said she was strong, that he needed a strong woman for the wild lands of the West, and she believed him. Like a fool, she believed him. Now she was here, in the middle of nowhere, holding a coward son in her arms. Thomas had fled 3 weeks ago during the night, when he learned that soldiers were looking for arms smugglers. He took everything, the money, the horses, the provisions. He left only a scribbled note. "Forgive me. I can't be a father right now." The baby cried, a weak sound lost in the wind. Margaret looked at his tiny, red, wrinkled face. "I don't know what to do, little one," she whispered. "Your mother is a fool who believed beautiful lies." That's when she heard it. A barely perceptible sound, like a snake moving among the rocks. She looked up, startled, and saw a shadow against the sky. A man, tall, still as the mountains in the distance. His long hair was tied in 2 braids, adorned with feathers that fluttered in the wind. His bare chest was covered only by a leather vest, bone and shell necklaces glinting under the last rays of sun. Apache. Margaret felt her blood run cold. She had heard terrible stories about the wild Native Americans who attacked ranches, stole women, killed entire families. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled. The baby cried louder, as if sensing his mother's fear. The man didn't move. He just watched her with dark eyes like the approaching night. There was no anger in them, no cruelty. There was something different, something she had never seen in any man's eyes. Respect. Slowly, very slowly, he approached. Margaret clutched her son to her chest, bracing herself for the worst. But when he came close, he knelt. His hands, large and scarred, remained open, empty. It wasn't a threat. It was an offer. "Please," she whispered, her voice broken, "don't hurt my baby." The man tilted his head as if understanding, even without speaking her language. Then with a gentle movement, he took a small gourd from his waist and offered it. Water. Margaret looked at him, distrustful, but her thirst was stronger than her fear. She drank in small sips, feeling the cool liquid slide down her parched throat. He waited for her to finish, then pointed to the horizon, where the dark shapes of the mountains were outlined. He made a gesture with his hand, as if to say, "Come." Margaret shook her head, backing away. She couldn't trust him. She couldn't follow a stranger into the unknown. The man didn't insist. He simply moved a few steps away and sat on a rock, his back to her, gazing at the stars that were beginning to appear. One by one, they lit up in the dark sky, as the desert chill descended upon them like a heavy blanket. The baby cried all night. Margaret tried to soothe him, singing the lullabies her mother used to sing to her when she was little, but her voice was shaky, broken by despair. The man didn't move from the rock, but she could feel that he heard, that he knew her pain. When the first ray of sun touched the mountains, painting them gold, Margaret looked around and saw she was alone. The man had disappeared like a ghost. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it all. But beside the rock where he had sat, there was a small handful of dried fruit and roots, food. She ate slowly, savoring each piece as if it were the last meal of her life. The baby nursed with more vigor after that, as if he too felt that something had changed. Margaret looked at the horizon, at the mountains that rose like sleeping giants, and made a decision. She couldn't go back. She had nowhere to go back to. Her family had disowned her when she ran off with Thomas. Society had scorned her for having a child out of wedlock, but maybe, just maybe, there was a place for her in those distant mountains. She stood up, adjusted the baby in her arm, and began to walk in the direction the man had pointed. Every step hurt. Every breath burned her lungs. But she kept walking because there was no choice, because sometimes when all is lost, the only thing left is the courage to move forward. The sun climbed in the sky, turning the desert into a furnace. Margaret felt her throat parch, her lips crack. The baby cried softly, too weak to scream. She stopped several times, thinking of giving up, of lying down in the sand and letting fate take her. But whenever she looked at her son's tiny face, she found the strength to take another step. It was in the middle of the afternoon, when the heat was unbearable, that she saw him again. He emerged from behind a rock, as if he had sprung from the earth itself. This time he carried a leather canteen and a damp cloth. He approached unhurriedly, offering water to her first, then gently moistening the baby's lips. Margaret watched him in silence. His face was angular, marked by sun and wind. A scar ran across his forehead from temple to temple. His eyes, however, were kind. Not the false kindness of men who wanted something in return, but the true kindness of someone who knows pain and doesn't wish to see it in others. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He watched her for a long moment, then touched his own chest. "Nasha," he said, his voice deep like distant thunder. "Nasha," she repeated, feeling the strange name on her tongue. "I'm Margaret." He nodded, then pointed to the baby with a questioning expression. "I haven't named him yet," Margaret admitted, embarrassed. "His father, he left before—" Nasha showed no surprise or judgment. He simply looked at the child attentively, as if he could see something she couldn't. Then, very gently, he touched the baby's forehead with his fingertips and murmured something in his language. It sounded like a blessing. They walked together for the rest of the day. Nasha stayed a few steps ahead, finding paths among the rocks that she would never have seen alone. Occasionally, he would stop and gather plants she didn't recognize, chewing them first before offering them, to show they were safe. When night fell, he found a small cave protected from the wind. He made a small fire, almost smokeless, and sat on the other side of the flames, respecting her privacy. Margaret nursed the baby and wrapped herself in the blue blanket, watching him through the flames. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Nasha was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, it was in a mix of broken English and gestures. "Also, lost," he said, touching his own chest. "Also, alone." Margaret saw something in his eyes, a familiar pain, the pain of someone who has been rejected, abandoned, left behind. Perhaps that's why he understood her. Perhaps that's why he didn't judge her. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Home," he replied simply. But Margaret knew that home, for people like them, wasn't a place. It was something built brick by brick, gesture by gesture, day after day. And maybe, just maybe, that's what they were doing at that moment, under the desert stars, with only a fire between them and the immensity of the night. The baby fell asleep, nestled in her arms, and Margaret closed her eyes, feeling for the first time in months something akin to hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she wouldn't face it alone. And that, for now, was enough. In the darkness, she heard Nasha hum softly, an ancient melody that seemed to come from the earth itself. It was an Apache lullaby, though she didn't know it. It was the sound of protection, the silent promise that no harm would come to her while he was watching. And for the first time since Thomas abandoned her, Margaret slept in peace. 3 days later, the red mountains rose before them like ancient towers, their faces cut by time and wind. Margaret's legs felt weak, but she kept walking. The baby slept in her arms, lulled by the steady rhythm of their steps. Nasha climbed the rocky paths with the agility of a mountain goat, stopping now and then to wait for her to catch up. It was when they rounded a steep curve that she saw it. The Apache encampment hidden in a natural depression among the rocks. Leather teepees spread like brown flowers around a crystal-clear spring. Smoke rose from several fires. Children ran among the horses. Women worked with hides stretched on the ground. And then everything stopped. One by one, the people looked up and saw her, the fat white woman covered in dust, holding a baby in her arms. Their faces hardened. Conversations died. Even the children stopped playing, as if a dark cloud had passed over the sun. Margaret felt the weight of every gaze, the silent judgment, the thinly veiled disdain. It was the same feeling as when she entered the church in Kansas, and everyone turned to whisper about her. But now it was worse. Now she was more than just a strange outsider. She was an enemy. Nasha walked in front of her, his chest high, his chin firm. He addressed an elderly man who approached with measured steps. The elder had completely white hair, braids adorned with colorful beads, and eyes that seemed to see through people. They spoke in Apache, voices low but tense. Margaret didn't understand the words, but she felt the hostility in the air as if she could touch it. The elder studied her from head to toe, then looked at the baby. His face remained as impenetrable as stone. He said something to Nasha, who replied firmly, pointing to her and making gestures she couldn't interpret. Other men joined the conversation. Voices rose. A woman spat on the ground. Margaret instinctively recoiled a step. The baby woke and began to cry, a fragile sound lost in the growing murmur. She looked around, searching for an exit, but she was surrounded by hardened faces and harsh stares. That's when Nasha turned to her. His eyes met hers over the heads of the others, and in them she read a clear message. "Trust me." He said something loudly that silenced the group. Then he walked to her and, surprisingly, took the baby from her arms. Margaret almost protested, but something in his gaze stopped her. Nasha lifted the child for everyone to see, then touched the small head to his forehead and murmured words in, Apache. It was a formal introduction, she realized. He was telling his people who they were. The elder approached again, this time looking directly at Margaret. He spoke slowly, in a mix of Apache and broken English. "Why do you come here, white woman? What do you want from us?" Margaret felt every word she knew flee her mind. How to explain that she wanted nothing, that she had nowhere to go, that she was there only because a kind man had decided to save her from death in the desert. How to say that she wasn't like the other white people they knew. I have nowhere else to go," she finally said, her voice weak. "My people cast me out. My son's father abandoned me. I didn't come to cause trouble. I just want to exist." The elder translated her words to the others. There were murmurs, some of scorn, others of curiosity. A young woman with a scarred face said something, pointing at Margaret, and several people laughed bitterly. Nasha returned the baby to Margaret, then placed himself between her and the group. He spoke with a clear, strong voice, gesturing with his hands. Margaret didn't need to understand the words to know he was defending her, that he was putting his honor on the line for her. The elder listened in silence, then nodded slowly. "Nasha says you came with a clean heart, that you lost your family as we lost ours. He asks for you to stay, but," his voice hardened, "you must work, you must learn our ways, and if you cause trouble, you will be cast out." Margaret nodded quickly, relieved. "I work hard, I always have, and I won't cause trouble, I promise." The elder studied her for another moment, then moved away. The group dispersed slowly, but Margaret could feel the stares that followed her. Nasha touched her shoulder gently and pointed to a small teepee in the corner of the encampment. The teepee was simple, made of well-sewn hides and wooden stakes. Inside, there was little more than some blankets, clay pots, and a fire in the center. But it was clean, dry, and protected from the wind. Margaret sat on one of the blankets, still holding the baby, and looked around. "Is it yours?" she asked. Nasha nodded, then knelt before her. He spoke slowly, searching for words in English. "You stay here. Baby too. I sleep outside." Margaret felt her face flush. She hadn't expected this, but it made sense. He was offering her his own home, his protection, while she found her place among the people. "You don't have to sleep outside because of us," she said. "We can find another place." "No," he replied firmly. "You need safe. Baby needs safe." In the days that followed, Margaret learned that life in the Apache encampment followed ancient, precise rhythms. The women awoke before the sun to fetch water and prepare food. The men cared for the horses and checked the territory borders. Children helped with smaller chores and played among the teepees. Margaret tried to fit in, but each attempt seemed to lead to new mistakes. She burned the first meal she tried to prepare because she didn't know the local plants. She tore a hide she was learning to sew. She carried water from the wrong side of the spring, the place reserved for sacred rituals. The women corrected her with forced patience, speaking slowly as if she were a child. Some laughed at her mistakes behind her back. Others simply ignored her. Margaret felt like a clumsy intruder, always in the way, always doing everything wrong. But there were exceptions. Ayana was a middle-aged woman whose husband had died in a battle against Mexican soldiers. She had 3 small children and understood the difficulty of raising a child alone. It was she who taught Margaret how to make seed porridge for the baby when her breast milk began to dwindle. It was she who showed her how to tie the child to her back to keep her hands free for work. "All babies are gifts from the Great Spirit," Ayana said one afternoon, as they watched the children play near the creek. "It doesn't matter who the parents are. What matters is the love they receive." Margaret shook her head, her eyes welling up. "Sometimes I think he'd be better off without me. A mother who can't even cook a proper meal." "You learn by doing," Ayana replied. "I also burned a lot of food when I was young. My mother-in-law used to say I cooked like a horse stomping on a campfire." They both laughed, and Margaret felt some of the weight lift from her shoulders. Nasha appeared every day, bringing firewood, fresh meat, news from the outside world. He spoke little, but his gestures said everything. The way he checked if she had everything she needed. How he played with the baby, making faces that made the child giggle. How he taught her Apache words, patiently repeating them until she pronounced them correctly. "To," he said one afternoon, pointing to the baby. "Water, life." "Tu," Margaret repeated, smiling at her son. "What a beautiful name." It was Nasha who brought her the first Apache clothes, a soft leather dress decorated with blue and red beads. Margaret dressed it with trembling hands, watching herself in the water's reflection. It was different from anything she had ever worn, more practical, more beautiful, more herself. "How do I look?" she asked, turning for him to see. Nasha watched her for a long moment, and Margaret saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't pity or protection anymore. It was admiration. "Beautiful," he said simply. Margaret felt her heart quicken. It had been so long since anyone had called her beautiful that she had almost forgotten what it was like to hear that word applied to her. But not everything was gentle moments. There was constant tension in the air, rumors of soldiers approaching, of other tribes being forced off their lands. The men gathered in closed circles, speaking in low voices. The women kept knives closer to their waists. It was on one of these tense nights that Margaret overheard the conversation that would change everything. She was returning from the creek with jars of water when she heard voices coming from the elder's teepee. She recognized Nasha's voice, but he was speaking louder than usual, almost shouting. Curious, she approached close enough to listen. "She's a spy," a voice she recognized as Takoda's, one of the younger warriors, was saying. "It can't be a coincidence that she shows up here now, just when the soldiers are looking for our encampments." "She came with a baby, wounded and alone," Nasha replied, his voice tense. "What kind of spy would that be?" "The most dangerous kind," Takoda retorted. "The kind that stirs pity, that lowers our guard. How many white women have you seen lost in the desert? It's too suspicious." Margaret felt her blood run cold. A spy. They thought she was a spy. The idea was so absurd that she almost laughed, but the serious tone of the voices stopped her. "You're being paranoid," Nasha said. "And you're being naive," Takoda exploded. "Or maybe not so naive. Maybe you have other reasons to protect her. Everyone sees how you look at her." There was a heavy silence, then the sound of quick footsteps. Margaret quickly retreated, hiding behind a rock as Takoda emerged from the teepee, his face contorted with anger. Nasha appeared at the entrance, looking around. His eyes met hers in her hiding place, and Margaret knew he knew she had heard everything. But he said nothing. He simply went back inside the teepee, leaving her alone with the weight of the accusations. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She stayed awake, holding toe, watching the stars through the teepee opening, thinking about everything she had heard. Did Nasha really see her as more than a refugee? Was he risking his position in the tribe for her? And more importantly, what would happen if others agreed with Takoda? When the sun rose, Margaret made a decision. She couldn't continue to be a burden, a source of problems for Nasha and the people who had taken her in. She had to prove her worth, show that she deserved to be there. But first, she needed to find out exactly what Nasha felt for her. And if he was willing to risk everything for a woman who might not deserve such a sacrifice. The day promised to be long and full of answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Dawn arrived red as blood, tinting the mountains with hues that seemed like an omen. Margaret woke with toe, crying, and a strange feeling in her chest as if something terrible was about to happen. Outside the teepee, she heard whispering voices, hurried footsteps, the metallic sound of weapons being prepared. She went out with the baby in her arms and saw the encampment in an uproar. Warriors ran among the teepees, carrying bows and spears. Women quickly gathered their most valuable belongings. Children were urgently called close to their mothers. Ayana appeared beside her, her face pale with fear. "Troopers," she said in a low voice. Takoda returned from patrol, saying he saw dust on the horizon. "Many horses. They're coming here." Margaret felt her stomach clench. "How many?" He said at least 30, maybe more. 30 troopers, against an encampment of women, children, and a few warriors. Margaret looked around, seeing the panic on the faces of the people she had begun to consider her family. The baby cried louder, as if sensing the tension in the air. "Where's Nasha?" she asked. "With the other men, planning the defense," Ayana replied. "But Margaret, they're saying you led the Thai troopers adjus here, that you marked the path for them to follow us." The words hit Margaret like a slap. "I would never do that. How can they think—" "I know you didn't," Ayana interrupted her, touching her arm. "But others aren't so sure. Takoda is convincing the elder that you should be handed over to the troopers to save the rest of the people." Margaret looked at Toe, who continued to cry, then at the tense faces around them. She saw distrust, fear, anger. In a few minutes, she had gone from protected refugee to suspect number one. "I need to talk to Nasha," she said, but Ayana shook her head. "He's in the war council. No one can interrupt." The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice even more. "Margaret, maybe it's best if you leave. Go before." "No," Margaret said firmly. "I won't run away again. If they want to blame me, let them blame me. But I won't let innocent people suffer because of lies." That's when they heard the first shout. A boy playing at the edge of the encampment came running, pointing south. "Horses! Many horses!" Panic spread like wildfire. Women screamed, children cried, warriors ran to their positions. Margaret saw a cloud of dust rapidly approaching, and within it the dark silhouettes of the troopers on horseback. Nasha appeared running, his face a mask of determination and fury. His eyes met hers for a moment, and Margaret saw in them not distrust but concern. He shouted something in Apache, then ran towards the Tajo troopers. Margaret looked around, seeing the chaos, seeing people she loved in danger, and made a decision that would change everything. She handed Toe into Ayana's arms. "Take care of him," she said. "Margaret, what are you going to do?" But Margaret was already running in the opposite direction from the danger, climbing the rocks behind the encampment. There was a narrow passage she had discovered a few days earlier, playing with the children. A passage that led to the top of the mountain, from where one could see the entire region. Her lungs burned when she finally reached the top. Below, she saw the encampment surrounded by the troopers, who shouted orders in English. Nasha and the other warriors were clearly outnumbered. It was then that she saw it. From the other side of the mountain, another group of troopers was coming, larger than the first. They weren't attacking from the front. They were preparing an ambush. The encampment would be attacked from two sides at once. Margaret looked down, calculating quickly. There was no time to descend and warn them. The ambush troopers' Dagestides would arrive in minutes, but there were piles of loose rocks at the peak, large rocks that could... Without thinking twice, she began to push. The first rock rolled down the mountain with a crash that echoed like thunder. Then came another, and another. In seconds, an avalanche of rocks descended towards the troopers, approaching from the rear. Shouts of men and horses mixed with the sound of the rocks. Margaret saw troopers being knocked down, horses rearing in fright, the perfect formation breaking into chaos. But her action did not go unnoticed. Troopers, from the front, saw the avalanche and pointed at her on the mountaintop. Some separated from the main group and began to climb towards her. Margaret looked around desperately. There was nowhere to run. The passage she had climbed was the only way out, and the troopers already blocked it. She was cornered. That's when she heard the war cries. Nasha appeared out of nowhere, leaping from rock to rock like a panther, followed by two other warriors. They attacked the climbing troopers, catching them by surprise. The combat was fierce and quick. When the dust settled, the troopers were dead or fleeing. Nasha ran to her, his eyes wild with adrenaline and fear. "Why did you do that?" he shouted, grabbing her shoulders. "Why did you put yourself in danger?" "There was an ambush," Margaret replied, breathless. "They were going to attack from behind. I had to warn them. I had to—" Nasha pulled her against his chest, holding her tightly, as if he wanted to make sure she was truly alive and whole. "Crazy woman," he murmured in her ear. "Brave and crazy woman." They descended together, finding an encampment in cautious celebration. The troopers, from the front, seeing the discovered ambush and losing the element of surprise, had retreated. The battle was won, at least for now. But Margaret barely had time to rejoice. Takoda waited for her at the encampment entrance, his face contorted with rage. "You," he shouted, pointing at her, "you brought them here. How did they know exactly where to find us?" "I didn't tell anyone," Margaret protested. "I don't even know who those troopers are. Liar, you sent signals to them. You marked our path." The accusation drew a crowd. People gathered around, murmuring, looking at Margaret with renewed suspicion. Even after saving the encampment, there were still doubts. It was the elder who approached, his face grave. "Takoda raises a serious question," he said. "How did the troopers find us so easily? This place has been secret for generations." Margaret looked around, seeing hardened faces, harsh eyes. Even Ayana seemed uncertain. Only Nasha remained by her side, but she could feel the tension in his body. "I don't know how they found us," Margaret said, her voice strong despite her fear. "But I know it wasn't me. I would risk my life to protect you all. I risk my life." "Pretty words," Takoda said with contempt. "But what if this is all part of the plan? What if you're pretending to save us, to gain our trust? Margaret felt tears burn her eyes, but she held them back. She wouldn't cry. Not in front of these people who doubted her after everything they had been through together. That's when a voice rose from the back of the crowd. She didn't bring the troopers. I did. Everyone turned. A young man stepped out of the shadow of the teepees, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped with shame. Margaret recognized him. It was Koa, one of the younger warriors, Takoda's cousin. "What are you saying?" the elder asked, his voice dangerously low. Koa looked up, and Margaret saw tears streaming down his cheeks. "They captured my sister 3 months ago. They said they'd kill her if I didn't tell them where we were camped. I didn't want to, but she's all I have left of my family, and—" Takoda stepped forward, his face pale. "Koa, no." "You knew?" Margaret exclaimed, suddenly understanding everything. "You knew it wasn't me, but you still accused me." The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. Takoda looked around, seeing the faces of his own relatives and friends turning against him. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The elder approached Koa, his face heavy with sadness. "You betrayed your own people out of fear." I'm sorry," Koa sobbed. "I didn't know what to do. She's my sister." "And we are your family," the elder retorted. "All of us, and you condemned us to save one person." Margaret looked at the broken young warrior and felt compassion, not anger. She knew desperation. She knew what it was like to be cornered with no good choices. She took a step forward. "Where is your sister being held?" she asked. Koa looked up, surprised. "At the Peace Fort, 2 days' ride south. But why would you—" "Yeah, because no one should have to choose between family and people," Margaret said. "Because maybe we can still save her." Nasha looked at her with admiration and something more, something that made her heart quicken. "You want to rescue the sister of the man who tried to destroy you." "I want to do what's right," Margaret replied, "and letting a girl die in the hands of the troopers isn't right." The elder studied Margaret for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have the heart of an Apache warrior, white woman. Perhaps it's time to stop calling you that." That night, as they planned the rescue, Nasha and Margaret walked to the spring, away from curious ears. The full moon bathed everything in silvery light, transforming the water into liquid mirrors. "Why did you do that?" Nasha asked softly. "Defend Koa, after all he caused." Margaret dipped her hands in the cool water, thinking about the answer. "Because I know what it's like to be desperate. I know what it's like to make bad decisions out of fear. If someone had offered me a second chance when I needed it most—" "I did," Nasha said. Margaret looked at him, seeing something new in his eyes. It was no longer just protection or friendship. It was love. True, deep, the kind she thought she'd never find. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you save me that day in the desert?" Nasha touched her face with gentle fingers. "Because in your pain, I saw my own pain. Because in your courage, I saw the strength I had lost. Because—" he hesitated, searching for the right words in English. "Because you made my heart beat again." Margaret felt the tears finally fall, but now they were tears of joy. "I love you," she said, the words coming out in a whisper. "I love you too," he replied, and kissed her under the moonlight, a kiss that sealed the promise of a future together. The rescue of Koa's sister was successful. Margaret used her knowledge of the white world to disguise herself and enter the Fort Bar, while Nasha and the other warriors attacked from the rear. The girl was saved, Koa was forgiven, and the unity of the tribe was restored. 3 moons later, Margaret and Nasha were married in a ceremony that blended Apache traditions with rituals she brought from her own culture. She wore a beautiful white leather dress decorated with beads and feathers, her hair adorned with wildflowers. Nasha wore his best hides and war necklaces, but his eyes shone with happiness. Tu, now almost a year old, took his first steps during the celebration, stumbling between laughing and applauding guests. Nasha picked him up, and Margaret saw in the face of the man she loved the pride of a true father. "He calls you Papa," she said, leaning against Nasha's shoulder. "And I call him son," Nasha replied, kissing the child's head. Margaret looked around, seeing friendly faces, hearing laughter and songs, feeling the warmth of the fire and the love that surrounded her. She thought of the woman she had been, rejected, abandoned, worthless, and the woman she had become, loved, respected, part of a true family. "What are you thinking?" Nasha asked, noticing her silence. "That sometimes you have to get completely lost to truly find yourself," she replied. "That sometimes what seems like the end is just the beginning." Nasha smiled, that rare smile he reserved just for her. And sometimes two broken people can heal each other. Later, when the party ended and they were alone in their new teepee, larger than before, decorated with wedding gifts, Margaret nursed Toe while Nasha tended the fire. "He'll grow up in two worlds," she said, looking at the sleepy baby. "He'll grow strong in both worlds," Nasha corrected. "Like his mother." Margaret smiled, feeling a peace she had never known before. Outside, the desert stretched infinitely under the stars. But she no longer feared the immensity. She had found her place, her family, her true love. And for the first time in her life, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged.